Morning, everyone. Of course, you already know me, I hope. Loreta from Christi, Filipinas. And it is my pleasure to present to you this morning our two speakers for the panel, sharing good practices on promoting peaceful societies towards a world without war. Each will speak for 15 minutes, and we will have hopefully 30 minutes of open forum after the presentations. Our first panelist will be Father Paul Lansu. He is Senior Policy Advisor of Pax Christi International. In that capacity, he deals with issues of security and disarmament, human rights, peace building, peace spirituality, and interfaith dialogue. He has also represented Pax Christi International at the international level, especially at the UN, and has participated in visits and fact-finding missions in numerous countries. Since 2006, he has also been a board member of the International Peace Bureau, and later elected as its vice president. He will speak on the topic from a global vantage point. Our second panelist is Father Nandana. Maybe I request both of you to already come up. Our second panelist is Father Nandana Manatunga, the director of the Human Rights Office based in Kandy, Sri Lanka. His presentation will deal with these concrete initiatives on the ground. His passion is to work for the rule of law and to be a voice for those who have no voice, especially the victims of human rights violations. Father Nandana founded a national network called Religious and Priests for Human Rights, which advocates for both justice for victims of Sri Lanka's civil war and reconciliation of the divided communities. Let us welcome our friends and panelists, Father Paul and Father Nandana.
If you ask me, is there a future for war? Then I think the answer is no, there is no future for wars. But the wars happen because the ones who start them think they can win them. And war does not solve conflicts. Enough is known to get on with the business of outlawing war and finding better means to resolve disputes. So war should be abolished, just as slavery has been abolished decades ago, although it still exists, like these days in Libya, for instance. But war should be abolished. Here in this region of our planet, we have seen enormous wars like in Korea, the early 50s, or in Vietnam in the 60s. We have seen, and still, the problem of conflicts here in this country, in the Philippines. And I notice a contradiction, because states continue to prepare for war while professing to wish to legislate it out of existence. So there is a need to focus more on the conviction that war is inherently immoral because of its costs to human well-being. And that is my main message of this morning. I have been educated for the priesthood in the 70s, and that was in the context also of what's going on in the world of that period of time, the Cold War period. And at a certain moment, we were shocked by the message of NATO, and especially by the then President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, to introduce a new weapon in the fight against the Warsaw Pact, in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. And that weapon was the neutron bomb. A neutron bomb killing only people, but keep all the rest intact. The infrastructure, the building remains as it is. The neutron bomb kills only you and me. So I was shocked. And it was the beginning of a mass demonstration and mass manifestations, not only in my country, but also elsewhere in the world. The decision made by Jimmy Carter was not to introduce that weapon in the context of NATO. But it was the beginning of a movement. And in the 80s we have seen a larger movement all over the world against the possible new modernization of new nuclear missiles, the SS-20, the cruise missiles, the Pershing IIs, etc., both in NATO and in Warsaw Pact, in Eastern Germany, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, etc. And so, for me, the study of looking at the dangers of nuclear wars began already in the 70s. I made my dissertation at the University of Bradford, and the topic of my dissertation was about the use, the threat of, and the possession of weapons of mass destruction. It was a moral theological reflection on that dimension of weapons of mass destruction. And in fact, the position of the Holy See, taken by Pope John Paul II in June 1982 on nuclear deterrence, because it is all about nuclear deterrence, saying that nuclear deterrence can only be acceptable under two conditions, under two criteria. First of all, it should be lead to disarmament, to nuclear disarmament, and secondly, it should be provisional. After decades of having that doctrine by the position of the Holy See on nuclear deterrence, after so many decades of not realizing by states that these criteria, the Holy See came up with a new position after long reflections and after long campaigns by people of our movements, etc. On the 7th of December, a message of the Pope, on the occasion of the humanitarian conference on nuclear disarmament taking place in Vienna, in a statement of Archbishop Tomassi on the 8th of December 2014 on the same topic. And the position of the Holy See at that moment was that both the use, but also the threat of, and the possession of nuclear weapons is not only illegal, but it is also immoral. So from that point on the 7th of December, the positions of Pax International and the Holy See came on the same page. We were on the same board. And we were very happy with that. And since then, and also with the fact that the Holy See distributed a very deep and well studied document about the risks of having nuclear weapons on our planet, that made the Holy See taking the leadership for these, to get the nuclear weapons abolished on our planet. And in fact, the fact that the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which started in 1968, didn't produce the real goals of it, nuclear disarmament, no proliferation, for instance, although the NPT conferences sometimes, not always, but sometimes ended up in a good climate, with good conclusions. For instance, in 2010, the meeting decided to have an international conference, for instance, on the Middle East having nuclear weapon-free zone. That should have been organized by the Finnish government in 2013 in December. That never happened. The NPT was blocked, but it is still existing. But thanks to the humanitarian approach, and I think that's very important also for us, because for us the victims are the main criterion of our work and our thinking. So the humanitarian approach of nuclear disarmament, in relation with at least two previous discussions and treaties, on the same approach, the humanitarian approach, so to say the landmines, with the treaty in Ottawa in 1997. We were very active on that treaty as well. And later on in 2006, in Oslo, December the 2nd or the 14th of December in Oslo, 2006, on the cluster munition treaty. And I was a witness when my foreign minister signed the treaty. I was a witness to see that happened. So I was very grateful that about 10, 12 years ago, people like you decided also to focus on the humanitarian approach of getting rid of nuclear weapons, based on the experience, based on the fact that many, well, first of all on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims and their witnesses, but also on the victims of the nuclear tests, like for instance on the Marshall Islands, during the 50s, the nuclear tests, and also with the fact that Tony de Bruyn, who died recently, the foreign minister of the Marshall Islands, he started a court case in the International Court of Justice in The Hague, calling the nuclear weapon states to make decisions in the direction of nuclear disarmament. So I think this is a very important issue, and I'm very happy that next Sunday on the 10th of December, two of our people here, Yasmin and Loreta, will be present to receive the Peace Award in the name of ICANN also. Now the question is also, is it possible to impose peace on a certain conflict, on certain situations of violence, for instance? Can you impose peace? And my main example of imposing peace is, for instance, the fact, and of course, imposing peace is important because it is the beginning of no fighting. It is the ending of making use of weapons. That is important, to stop it. But it doesn't mean that the root causes of that conflict are solved. And so, for instance, the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina, I call it the Pax Dayton, the Pax Richard Holbrooke. He was the main negotiator to get an agreement, a Pax agreement for Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1996 and 1997. But the reality on the ground, and we have been there several times since then in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Sarajevo, the reality is that the main problems exist. The tensions among the ethnic groups, the tensions between the religions, the tensions between the Croats, the Serbs and the Bosniaks are still there. But of course, the main idea was to stop the fighting, and that was realized. Yeah, I believe also that it is important that, and also from a point of the peace, from the view of the peace movement, that is that we should put pressure on our political authorities to solve conflicts in what I call a human way. That means that more and more should be invested in methodologies of dialogue, in methodologies of conflict mediation, in methodologies of bringing people together, because it is so important that diplomacy can result in peaceful living together. And I believe also that here silent diplomacy can play a role. Of course, there is the role of the United Nations, there is the role of the Security Council, but sometimes there are blockages. Most of the time there are blockages. So silent diplomacy, that means diplomacy behind the scenes, is important. And there several countries play their role. Norway in Israel-Palestine, not with that success because of the Oslo Agreement didn't result in a good manner. But there is the role of Costa Rica, there is the role of Cuba in Colombia, there is the role of the Holy See in the dispute between Chile and Argentina. There is now today the role of the Holy See for the internal problems in Zimbabwe. I believe that silent diplomacy is also important to get the peaceful societies. Of course, we are confronted with different types of wars. In the past, most of the wars were wars between states. That has been reduced in number, luckily. But we have seen, and that has been always during history, we see more and more also wars among the people, so the civil wars, the discordia. And I believe that war amongst the people is called the modern war. There is also the situation of occupation. And I believe that occupation is not a legitimate defense. We see the occupation since the end of the 40s by China over Tibet. And in the 90s we have been campaigning for the human rights in Tibet very strongly at the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, with the result that we had a lot of troubles with the Chinese diplomacy, especially in the context of the United Nations. And we were threatened to get rid of our ECOSOC status. But there is also the occupation of other situations. There was the Falkland occupation by Argentina. And there also the Holy See, John Paul II, mediated between Argentina and Great Britain with Margaret Thatcher. And then of course there is the Crimea, since 2014, occupied by the Russian Federation. And also the eastern part of Ukraine, there is de facto an occupation by the Russian Federation. The most well-known occupation for us is the Palestinian occupation since 1967. And I believe that that should remain a main topic of our movement. There's also the occupation in Papua since 1963. So it is very important that we focus on this element of the situation also. One of the main dilemmas in our work is, for instance, the Christian militias. And I refer to two situations in Syria and in Iraq. Because what will you do when you have to stand your ground in the midst of a lawless environment? What will you do when your wife, your children and other members of local communities run the risk of being murdered? What will you do when there is no longer a decisive protective force? So these are crucial questions to answer also. It's difficult to understand the situation of people in that situation. But for instance, in Syria, some Christians have organized themselves in the so-called Christian Militia Syriac Military Council, and the organization expanded from a couple of hundred men to the largest force of Christian self-defense in Syria. And in this case, there were Assyrian Christians that successfully defended themselves against Islamic State alongside Kurds and Arabs. And the second example of Christian militias is in the north of Turkey, in the so-called Bible Belt, in the neighborhood of Nineveh, and they call themselves Nineveh Plain Forces in Iraq. They have asked and still ask the West for weapons and military equipment. So my question is, can we deny these victims their right to self-defense? Their choices are often limited. It is fighting or it is be murdered. It is not fitting for us to judge or condemn. There is also another dilemma in which we are confronted with. That is the problem of mass killings, the genocides. And also this part of the world has experience on that. In Cambodia, we know the killing fields with Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge. We have seen in Rwanda 1994 a genocide. In the 90s, we have seen in Srebrenica, in Bosnia-Herzegovina also, a genocide. And last week, General Mladic has been life sentenced because of his role in these mass killings. So there's another dilemma. How to deal with self-defense and how to deal with mass killings and how to prevent it. I also believe that morality and ethics is always running behind technology. The technology is in such a rapid revolution that moral theologians, but also other people, they are running behind the capacities of new technology. And in warfare, speed and communication is crucial. In 1870, and also during the First World War, the railway was the new methodology for speed and to win the war. In 40 and 45, it was the highways. It were the highways to get speed of the tanks, etc. So technology is the main driver of change in warfare. Efficient transport and communication, speed. But today we see technological advances in robotics and in artificial intelligence. We see now the existence of killer robots. And 2 weeks ago at the Vatican Conference on Nuclear Disarmament, Judy Williams was talking about the killer robots as it. It is killing. It is not you killing me. It is not me killing you. It is unmanned. It is the computer. It is the program. It is killing. So that is a new phenomenon. It is killing. We have the drones. We have the cyber power. You know, in the military, sometimes I have meetings with military people, and you know there is the land force, there is then the navy, there is the air force, and the military, they have been developing a fourth force, the cyber force, because of the new technologies in electronics, etc. I also believe that we have still to campaign against the huge military expenditures in our world. Last year, and I refer to the figures of CIPRI, last year $1.79 trillion have been spent on arms. That is an increase of 0.4% with 2015. And I believe, and of course the increase of the defense budgets worldwide, and NATO countries are pushed to get their GNP to 2% of it, and we are discussing that, of course. Of course, the global context of fear, the global context of people feeling the need for security, combined with nationalism that excludes other people, etc. We discussed that earlier this week. Of course, that feeling creates and gives food to the politicians to increase their budgets. And I believe that in comparison with the huge social needs our world population is in, like the hunger, the poverty, that is, from a moral point of view, not acceptable. That distinction is too big. So, weapons kill, even if they are not used. And I was shocked again, I'm from time to time shocked. I was shocked on the 30th of April of this year, because the USA Army, with the blessing of President Trump, they bombed shelters of Daesh, of Islamic State in Afghanistan. And they were able to destroy part of the shelters. They were able to kill tens of Islamic fighters. But in the end, military, there was no difference. What was the meaning of the bombing of that part of Afghanistan? Military, there was no difference. It made no political difference either. It was only symbolic. Now, that bomb, that famous bomb, was called the mother of all bombs. because it was so a destructive bomb that, that the USA called it the mother bomb. And there was only one, according to my information, only one statesperson, if you look at the Holy See also as a state, which it is, Pope Francis called and said, you cannot call a bomb a mother, because a mother gives life and a bomb that kills. Now 2 days later, the Russians, because Cold War is not far away, the Russians, they said, but we have the father of all the bombs. Even more destructive than the mother bomb of the USA. So this is and that mother bomb costed 15 million euros. Just to give you an example that money can be used for other purposes, for the social needs of our planet. I also believe that war as such is in fact an instrument. War is an institution, and war should be de-institutionalized. War is a machine, it is a system. It is working on its own dynamics, with private companies, with mercenaries. And it was Dwight Eisenhower who warned the world about that military and industrial complex. So I believe that war as a system there's an urgent need to put that system under democratic control. It is too much separated. And that is still a task to do. We also see the different situations of walls, fences and mining fields. You can move that page up. You also see the walls, the fences and the mining fields. Of course the major, and that is just in the context of the Cold War, for instance, the major barrier between East and West was the Iron Curtain, with the Berlin Wall as a main symbol. But we see also walls on the border between Mexico and the USA. We see walls in Europe because we want to get the refugees out of Europe, keep them in Turkey, for instance. So we are building walls and barriers. And we see a new wall in Israel-Palestine since 2002. We see also in North Korea and South Korea the mining fields of about 4 kilometers between the two borders. And last week there was a soldier of North Korea able by car to escape from North Korea to the south with a lot of risks. But I think that there's a wall between India and Bangladesh also. So there are different walls and fences in our world which needs to be dismantled if we talk about a new open society. I also believe that we need to invest in conflict preventive peace missions. And I also believe that we have to invest in looking at the root causes of war. We mentioned that earlier already this week. Poverty reduction is essential, and the SDGs this afternoon will focus again on that. But maybe as a conclusion, I hope that we can be able to, what I call, breaking the spiral of finances. And it was in the 70s that I was inspired by the analysis of Archbishop Dom Helder Camara, when he was talking about the spiral of violence. It was taken over by Johan Galtung and others. But the spiral of violence is based on, there is structural violence, and people who are the victims of that structural violence react with violence, and so the occupier, they use again violence against who is reacting. And for me, the main example today of such a spiral of violence is the occupation of Palestine. The occupation of Palestine is the structural violence. And not all of them, but many Palestinians reacted with the Intifada. In 1987, with throwing stones. The first Intifada. The second Intifada on the 28th of September 2000. And the third Intifada, and our former international president, Michel Sabah, he hopes that the third Intifada will be a non-violent one. But this is an example of the Sparo finds. Occupation is a structure. The Intifada is the reaction of the Palestinians. And of course the Israelis react again against that type of finance. And so that needs to be broken open. I also believe that churches are peace-building entities. That is my dream, that all the churches, both the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy See, but also all the churches and religious communities of the World Council of Churches, are becoming more and more justice and peace communities. So you can say that it's a dream, maybe it's very ambitious, but the churches altogether should be the biggest peace movement of our world. I believe that there is a role to play in peace spirituality, on the teaching of the church, also in how to deal with war and peace, but also in reconciliation based on equality. Because, and I want to conclude with that, you can have only reconciliation amongst people when they are equal. There is no reconciliation possible between the Israelis and Palestinians because they are not equal. Palestine is not recognized by Israel. And to have a political reconciliation, you need two partners. And that still has to be realized. So much more is to said about all this, but I think that's more than enough for now.
So, Father Nandana.
Thank you very much, Father Paul. I think you have set the tone for my presentation. And also, I think yesterday's exposure also, in a way, connected to my presentation, because I recall the same situation back in our country. Actually, I am a member of Christi since 2000, and I have been attending several meetings, and it has really helped me a lot. So today I speak about sustainable peace and good practices. Yes, next one. As Father Paul mentioned, for us and for everyone, I think, to build a peaceful society, equality and non-discrimination, as mentioned, becomes very crucial. As I was telling you about yesterday, I was really appreciating the Philippine Church, how they have come forward and made so many plans and to work with the victims and also the families. It was just the opposite in our case. We had to do on our own, because the church actually had no planning, no involvement in right throughout the civil war, and before that we also had we had the civil war for 30 years, and also the youth insurrection before that for 3 years. And we have today more than 89,000 widows. Most of them, I mean, they believe that they are their husbands or the children been killed, or some still believe that they are missing and would come back. But when it comes to the church, whether it is the church in the north or in the south, we never had, except the church in the north, of course, they worked with the people. But everything was done, even now, not in an official way. So that was the difference I experienced yesterday. Because even my work, well, always my bishop tells, it's up to you. You take your own risk. So it is nothing official. So it took at least about, even after, because I was working at the media center, at the Human Rights Media Resource Center. I made it the Human Rights Media Resource Center. It was a media center. Before that, the Caritas. Then when we started the Human Rights Office, it took about 3 years for him to recognize it as part of the church. So what I did was, I got him to attend like meetings where, like yesterday, where the victims spoke and the parents spoke, and it took about 3 years for him to be convinced that it has to be done through the church. So this is this saying I like very much from parliamentaries. No era will ever succeed in destroying the unity of the human family, for it consists of men who are equal by virtue of their natural dignity. We also had the pastoral letter. These are some of our bishops' pastoral letter issued in year 2013. And this pastoral letter was actually very rich in content. The bishops all agreed and they signed and they issued it. But then afterwards, after issuing it, they never spoke about it. So that it was a kind of hidden treasure. And we, as several groups, Loreta mentioned about creating a group of priests and nuns for human rights. For the last 10 years, actually, we are coming together twice a year, and now we have about 150, 160 members of priests and religious, but they all come together for 2-3 days and we spend, and it is all voluntarily. And what we did was we started disseminating this treasure to the people. We made handouts, we made exhibitions, and we tried to disseminate, but the bishops did not want it to go to the people. They never spoke about it. Now Father Paul also asked this question, whether we can impose peace. Actually what happened in Sri Lanka was that we had the civil war, and the government slogan was war for peace. So actually the war ended, the civil war ended in 2009, and the casualties were very heavy. Unofficial casualties numbers, we had more than 140,000 deaths, and as I said, 89,000 widows. And that is the unofficial, but the government never accepted those numbers. They say 40,000, 30,000 and so on. And we have peace now. That peace is just the absence of the war. So as Father asked this question, can we impose peace? So it was the imposition of peace, because there is no war, that's all. But the problems, the root causes are never been solved, or political solutions were never been identified. So just to give a kind of to motivate you, Sri Lanka, we have a population of 20.48 million. We have a new president. And we have three languages, Sinhala, Tamil and English. English because we were colonized by the British until 1948. The religions, it's a Buddhist country. The Constitution says Buddhism has to be given the first place. So it's very dangerous because when it is mentioned in the Constitution, everything that has to be decided by the Parliament has to be done in consultation with the chief Buddhist monks. Now this has become a very huge problem, and the present government, the present president was actually drafting a new constitution, a civil constitution, but once again now Buddhism has, they want to include the same phrase that Buddhism has to be given the first place. Then we have Hindus 30%, Muslims and Christians, we are actually even, it says 7.7%, but even less now. Sri Lanka was a peaceful country with people of 4 religions and diverse ethnic groups, and the people lived in harmony, respected and accepted each other. But it was actually divided by politicians. Politicians unfortunately divide the communities for the purpose of adopting divide and rule policy. They divided people on the basis of language, ethnicity, and further political parties emerged representing ethnic groups, religions. Conflicts emerged that gradually led to a civil war. So much so, you don't believe that we had about 12 or 13 Buddhist monks in the parliament. So Buddhist monks also contested elections. In our last general election, 130 Buddhist monks contested elections, but none of them got elected, luckily. But there is one Buddhist monk now who has been elected from the list. The Muslims, they have a Muslim party. So Buddhists have a Buddhist, that's why I said the on basis of politics and also as religions we are being divided. Except Christians or Catholics, all the others have their own political party. The Sinhalese youth uprising I mentioned, from 79 we had, then 89 to 90 made 60,000 persons disappeared. Disappeared in the sense I said, like same thing happened, like what yesterday the parents said. They came to houses, they took them out, they shot. Only difference was the bodies were not given to their parents. Some bodies were just thrown on the water, the rivers. Some were burnt, but none of the bodies were given back to the parents. And as religious, we saw what was happening, but we were not able to do anything. We were not supposed to bury the dead. Even if you touched a body or tried to bury, you would have been arrested. Some priests were arrested because they were trying to bury the dead. The civil war that raged for almost 30 years shattered the whole country, leaving 89,000 widows in the north and more than 40,000 deaths. Now this is 40,000 is the government estimate, but it is according to the Bishop of Mana, who had all the statistics, the former bishop, it is more than 140,000. People denied of their own houses, land, living under the shadows of the military. Now this is the same situation still, because after the war people are not still allowed to go back to their own houses, to their own land, because the military is still controlling the north. So most of the people, these parents, now there were 2 protests going on for more than 6 months. One protest by the parents of the missing and the disappeared. They are just having a protest, continuous protest, asking the government to give away the truth. I mean, to reveal the truth. What happened to their sons or their husbands? Military still occupy the land in the north. So this, as I said, people want the land. They want to go back, but the government, who, as I said, impose peace and peace, they say in order to maintain peace, that their presence is necessary. So there are huge, I mean, heavily militarized, and not only militarized, but they are also, the army is doing all the work of the civilians. They also do cultivation, they do fishing, and so therefore the ordinary people, especially in the north, they have lost their livelihood. Laws which undermine the rule of the law, like the Prevention of Terrorism Act, PTA, that is still in place. So now we have lots of political prisoners in prisons. Our office, we are taken up several cases of the political prisoners, and we have been able to release some of them. Because of the language issue, there were some loopholes where we were able to, because all of them they were prosecuted saying that they made a confession. These confessions were done after severe torture for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months torture. And they made confession, the government says, the police say they made confessions in their own languages. So there were contradictions, so we were able to get some of them. And also we were able to release some of them by discussing with the Attorney General. They actually changed the charges, and they were asked to plead guilty. So which we asked them whether they would like, because they were already detained for more than 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So they said okay. So they were given 2 years to 4 years sentence. So that was pretty good enough. Actually now that they know that they will be released in another 1 or 2 years. Ethnic conflict and the civil war officially ended in 2009, but the transitional justice process never saw the light. Many extremists are still in action. Like now, you always people in the other places, like they think Buddhist monks are very peaceful. The Buddhism it's not a religion, of course, as a philosophy, the Buddhist monks are very peaceful, but in our country it is just the opposite. Like in Burma, they are very actively engaged in politics. Actually, if there is a protest or problem in the university, it is always by the Buddhist monks. So the transitional justice and human rights reconciliation process should bring about sustainable peace. So this is what we are trying to do, in our office. So our efforts, so what we do in our office, so we have to, there are 2 levels, about transitional justice process. But at the same time, until that gets off, these people have to be looked after. So therefore, the criminal prosecution for the least of the most responsible for what they asked, to prosecute those who are responsible. Truth-seeking, fact-finding process into human rights violations by non-judicial bodies. Reparations for human rights violation take in various forms, individual, collective, material and symbolic. And asking for reforms of the law and institutions, including the police, judiciary, military and military intelligence. So this is what actually the people ask in the transitional justice process. So innovations, what we try to do with the victims, ensuring safe return to the displaced and restoring their property. So because they have no property. Truth seeking, search for the disappeared, documenting their stories, preparing families of the disappeared to testify before commissions that were set up. Example, there were a commission on the called task force and office for the missing persons set up. Reconciling communities by exposure to both communities. Then we have healing programs, healing the trauma of the disappeared families. We conduct workshops for women, especially on self and community projects. Recognizing the women-headed families, because we don't use the term widows, so we call women-headed families. Campaign against disappearances, because in Sri Lanka disappearance is not a crime. Then legal assistance to the political prisoners, reuniting families, workshop for the holistic wellness of family members of prisoners. Then memorialization, it is not allowed by officially. You can't memorialize. You can't have any service to remember. Officially, it's not allowed. So innovations, ensuring the safe return of the displaced and restoring their property. One. So these are the people. They are still waiting to go back to their lands. Truth-seeking, search for the disappeared. Now this is a huge task. What we are doing at the moment is that we are trying to document, because some of the people are getting old and some are, they might die in a couple of years before all these commissions are set up. So we want to document, prepare the families to testify. Come back. Yeah. Now this is a protest by the parents of the missing and the disappeared. These parents are actually photos of their family members. Now they are having this protest. I think they are still having this protest in the north for more than 3 months now, continuously. All what they ask the government is to tell us whether these people are alive or dead. Because apart from the official prisons, there were so many unofficial detention camps. In one detention camp, there were about 770 detainees. And when the government changed, the detention camp was closed. But nobody knows what happened to the people. So we have program with these families of the disappeared just to help them for income generation, because father was also mentioning yesterday, because when the breadwinner is no more, then the family becomes very weak and financially not knowing what to do. As we said, empowering the women-headed families and youth in the north for improvement in the psychological well-being. We take up this as one of our priorities. Healing, because unless the widows, or we don't call widows, the women-headed families, the women, those who are living, unless they are healed, they cannot do anything. They cannot be employed, they cannot work. They are in a kind of a trauma. So the first thing that we try to do is to make them to attend these programs on trauma counseling, and healing. Then we campaign still against disappearance. As I said, disappearance is not a crime in our country. So we ask to bring a legislation to make disappearance as a crime. Then we, as I said, legally assist the victims of Prevention of Terrorism Act, that is the political prisoner. Then we also, not only the prisoners, but also we work with the families, because every month we have meetings in our office where all the members of the family members come together. We have two meetings. On first Thursday we have the members of the disappeared families come together, and on Friday the families of the prisoners come together. Then we have these workshops of holistic wellness of family members of prisoners. Once again, counseling. Then we do a lot of programs for the youth on transitional justice. Then also, as I said, there are very few priests and nuns working for human rights, and even in the civil society, not many. So in order to encourage them, on the Human Rights Day on the 10th of December, this time also we have a Human Rights Award ceremony. So during the year we have competitions in the schools and so on, art and essay competition, and we get very good responses, like the 2,000 schools participate, and more than 4,500, 5,000 children. So what we do is, on the 10th of December, we have this Human Rights Award ceremony, and we award some of the religious and also civil society members, lawyers and doctors and so on, just to encourage them to continue their work. Then we also have public exhibitions to mobilize the civil society, and special days, and also we still continue with a signature campaign asking the government to prosecute the torture perpetrators, because during the past regime, during the past 10 years, not a single prosecution of police or army officers under the Torture Act of 1994, Act number 22 of 1992. Before that we had few prosecutions. So this is one of the pictures of our signature campaign. Along with the signature campaign, we always have an exhibition. Yes, so that's it.